Namaste and welcome to the Bharatvaarta podcast. We're on the 105th weekly. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely Sunday morning. I'm Roshan Karyappa. I have Neerav Kanodra and Abhishek Paul as well here to run you through the news and events of the week that was. It was a pretty eventful week. Last week, obviously, India celebrated our 76th Independence Day, and we're going to analyze the Prime Minister's speech at Red Fort. There were some pretty interesting remarks that Minister Hardeep Puri made on the Rohingya refugees that got him embroiled in a sort of a Twitter, fury as such. So we'll talk about that. Unfortunately, FIFA has suspended the All India Football Federation as well. And then there was a case of BJP revamping the Parliamentary Committee after about 8 years or so. Neerav, Abhishek, how are you guys doing? Did you guys see the videos of the Finnish Prime Minister partying?
Yeah, so that seems like the latest controversy on the.
That was like the highlight of the week and kind of like the fun news or the odd news. Yeah, and she took a drug test and I think it was all clean, so all good. PM wants to party. It's a free country, nothing. And hopefully, let's like a lot of people think politics everywhere is all inclusive and you don't need to be like old, boring person to be in politics. So yeah, all good.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little conflicted, I mean, I didn't know how to think about it, really, right? I mean, obviously, I mean, as an individual, obviously, you should be free to do, whatever you want, right, within legal, ethical sort of a framework. But then, I mean, I think you do carry a certain responsibility for your conduct as a public person, right, as a politician or a bureaucrat and so on. But anyway, I mean, I guess that was that. Let's talk about the couple of episodes we put out last week. Neerav, the one on Kautilyanomics with Sriram Balasubramaniam has been doing really well. What are the highlights of this episode for you?
Oh, yeah, so I think one very good thing is like so Kautilya or Chanakya has gotten like a bad name, like being compared with Machiavelli and like being a scheming person. A lot of his things have been spoken about or written about are like in Warcraft or like in espionage, etc. He looks at Arthashastra more from an economics angle and finds there are like timeless nuggets. He says how Kautilya calls for like a strong state, calls for the a role of international trade between different kingdoms, calls that the even in a monarchy at that times that the legitimacy of power is by welfare of the people. So calls for like a limited welfare state, and so those principles are not just restricted to geography like India or restricted to that time frame. They're a little bit timeless and they're applicable everywhere. So I think it's quite a nice thing. He also like makes it distills it down for a common person to understand. So I think it's a very good thing. It's something for us to be proud of our own culture rather than just looking at like the West for Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, etc. Right? It's a very interesting talk, and his book is out, Kautilyanomics. So you can order it either online or through your favored bookshop.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty interesting book for sure, right? I mean, I got to glance through a few chapters. I've pre-ordered mine. I mean, it should be here sometime next week. Yeah, I mean, any kind of exploration on indigenous thought, right? These kind of concepts just is so necessary, right? Kautilya, especially. I mean, it was shocking to me that we hadn't discovered or we had forgotten Kautilya for a good amount of our history, right? And it was rediscovered, I think, sometimes the 1800s or 1900s, early 1900s. It leaves me thinking, what else we haven't, got access to at this point of time, right? I mean, considering that the libraries were burnt and all of those things happened. Yeah, so definitely do check out this episode. It's a very nice episode, very well conducted by Neerav. I had the good fortune of talking to Ami Ganatra, who you've heard multiple times on the podcast. She's been both a guest and a host on Bharatvaarta. Her earlier book was Mahabharata Unraveled, where she spoke about lesser known facets of the Mahabharata. In this case, she looks at Ramayana. She analyzes characters, events, and in a very present lens as well, right? I mean, so for instance, one of the things that you often hear from supposed modernists is that the Ramayana was sexist and misogynist, and she lays the facts bare on that front. For instance, right? I mean, talking about how a lot of the things in Bhagwan Ram's life was driven by the women, whether it was Kaikeyi or Sita or even Shurpanakha, right? So fascinating conversation. Do get the book as well. We've linked it in the description. Definitely check out that episode. So two very nice episodes. They've been doing really well. If you haven't seen the episodes yet, I mean, I encourage you to please check it out. We'll also publish these on podcast platforms next week. Not to belabor the point, but if you are a fan of Bharatvaarta, please rate and review us so more people can discover us. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about the first thing from this weekly. Prime Minister Modi's speech at the Red Fort on Independence Day paints a very positive picture for the future of India. Prime Minister Modi called upon the collective spirit of 130 crores Team India to take the country forward and ensure that it is a developed nation in the next 25 years. He highlighted that corruption and dynastic politics were the two biggest challenges in India. He emphasized that India's strength lies in its diversity, calling it the mother of democracy. Prime Minister Modi laid down five resolves or the Panch Pran for the Amrit Kal to work towards a Viksit Bharat or a developed India, remove any vestiges of colonialism, retain our roots, ensure unity in diversity, and carry out a citizen's duties. Guys, I think the couple of things that really stood out for me was the part about decolonizing India, and also the emphasis on startups and innovation. Again, I mean, this is like sort of shedding the baggage and having a very forward thinking view of our progress, right? I mean, of the way ahead. Yeah, Abhishek, what do you think?
Yeah, so as you said, one of the interesting things was, the emphasis on startups or entrepreneurship and so on, right? And so he coined a new term, one of those famous slogans, right? So we used to have Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, then Jai Vigyan was added a few years ago, and then this year he added Jai Anusandhan, right? Which means giving the right importance to R&D and research and those kind of things, right? So that's a very welcome step in terms of ensuring or giving citizenry the view that the top leadership of the country is also looking forward to more original research and development coming out of the nation, right? Because that's where our we as a country we can move up the value chain, right? And that's what is needed in terms of us get moving on to become a richer nation, right? So yeah, that was good. As you said, he talked about the Punch brand, right? Five pledges for 2047, and the interesting one there, one which has got the headlines and got conversations rolling is him basically saying that we need to come out of the colonial mindset, right? And that is something recently only something which which has become a topic of discussion in general in society, right? And I was just thinking, like, there is this few months back there was a video, right, where a certain IAS officer went to a school in Bihar and he was like blasting the teacher because he was wearing kurta pajama basically as a teacher, right? And so that's like we are still in the colonial mindset, right, where we are expecting people simply to wear shirt and pant, because that we cannot think beyond that, right? I mean, people are sitting in 35-40 degrees heat. It's fine if people are in Indian clothes. And so this kind of colonial mindset sort of steeps in various forms, right? Whether it is us looking for foreign validation in everything, or whether it is at the ground level, right, where we are not respectful about Indian traditions and festivals, but we continue to remain in awe of everything Western. So yeah, that's another important thing that he sort of mentioned. Another good thing I would say is that not just in the speech, but in general, this government has started to give dues to more than one stream of the Indian freedom struggle, right? So whether it is, talking about the Adivasi freedom struggle, fighters like Birsa Munda or Alluri Sitaram Raju, right, who was featured or on whom the RRR movie is based, for example. Or he talked about other freedom fighters who are basically kind of still ignored in the mainstream narrative. So I would say that was another good thing, which is or let's say that's a good development of the last few years, which continued in this speech. So yeah, all in all, it's a good speech without really being too out of the way, right? And another thing, I think he talked about India's decade, right, coming. That's a continuing theme of Prime Minister Modi, where he continues to talk about digital India, and there is still a lot of headroom for us, right? Whether it is 5G or semiconductors or optical fibers, right? So there's a lot of headroom there for India to still grow and improve. So I think I would say that he hit most of the important points that are sort of needed for the nation at this point in time.
Yeah, it was a great speech for sure. And I think this narrative shift also, right, a very important point that you made, which is that looking beyond Mahatma Gandhi or Chacha Nehru in terms of the freedom struggle as such. I think that, of course, I mean, quite a few people noted on either sides of the political aisle, right? I mean, a few of them were. Not very happy with the fact that Pandit Nehru was not given a more prominent place in certain advertisements and so on. But yeah, I mean, it's good that on the other side, I mean, we're seeing that a lot more freedom fighters are being highlighted. So that for sure. I particularly liked the bit about startups and innovation, as I mentioned earlier, right? I think Prime Minister Modi said yesterday's startups are today's unicorns, and he particularly noted the kind of startups that had come up during the pandemic, right? An especially difficult time, noting also the record fundraising and the surging valuations and whatnot, and saying that this is the fruits of labor, right, and very optimistic for the youth of the country as such. So yeah, I mean, that was really amazing to see the prime minister talk about these things. Nirav, what kind of stood out for you?
So one is what always stands out is Modi is a master communicator. Every time he comes up with like a few key points and the way he communicates it, these all remain in people's minds, right? So he's not only selling an idea and he's ensuring there's retention. So that's why like he's a master brander. So Panch Pran this time. The other thing is he's looking at like people to do their own duty, like the citizen's duty, right? If all of us come together, work towards a common goal, work towards a long term goal. So a lot of times the politicians are going from like election cycle to election cycle. Every 6 months there's another state election, and they're looking here and now at the very immediate. But sometimes you're too focused, you lose your way in the longer direction, right? So here, what he's done is he's saying that okay, we've had 75 years, we've come so far, but now the road for the next 25 years. So we are going want to go to become like a fully developed country, and calling for like unity in diversity. So respecting India's diversity, but saying everybody, if we are united, if everybody works towards making India a developed country, if all the 1.4 billion people work together in this direction, it kind of galvanizes people, right? So I think that is a very good thing, looking very much like for long term progress and staying on course, right? So I think that's one thing. Regardless, right, he's a master orator, a master communicator, much more than say like Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He was a great orator, but he was not this good, I would say, like a brander. Or the way Modi kind of like comes up with these catchphrases, or someone in his team, but the whole team together has done a fabulous job of like communicating and ensuring there's some sort of retention in the people as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's just I was looking at some videos. I mean, and they were making a marketing case study out of Prime Minister Modi and the BJP, right? And so true, right? I mean, if you look at the phrases, Har Ghar Tiranga, Amrit Mahotsav, right, Panch Pran. I mean, these are amazing, right? I mean, kind of hits the pulse of the nation, actually, right? All right, moving on. There is yet another row between the Aam Aadmi Party and the centre after Minister Hardeep Singh Puri's tweets on Rohingya refugees. Mr. Puri posted on social media that Rohingyas would get basic amenities, UNHCR identity cards, and Delhi police protection. He later retracted the statement after the Delhi government said they were not consulted and the Union Home Ministry denied the report. The Home Ministry later released a statement with their position on illegal foreigners, stating that they are to be kept in the detention center as per their deportation by law. Meanwhile, the Aam Aadmi Party opposed the alleged decision, saying the elected government was not consulted before making such decisions. Nirav, so what is really happening? I mean, this got everyone really hot and bothered on Twitter. But yeah, can you describe this for our listeners?
So I think, I don't know. First, it is a failure of communication. Either it is damage control. So first of all, India has a huge problem. There are big all any big city has a lot of slums. There's a lot of illegal encroachment. There's a lot of people without like good housing, even in villages. While the government is working towards this, there is the PM Awas Yojana. There are cheaper housing being built, and like it's in the process for the economically weaker section of the society. Obviously, Indian citizens should come first. I don't know what was the thought process, either to try and switch the narrative where India was seemed to be saying that the India was anti-refugee on the CAA, etc., or maybe to try and get some sort of like political mileage within Delhi, where the state government is with AAP. I don't know what was being thought, but either there has been some sort of a miscommunication between different parts of the government, or there has been like a misstep which seeing the backlash and the furor on social media, BJP and the Home Ministry. So this is the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, which Hardeep Singh Puri is, and then the Home Ministry led by Amit Shah, kind of giving clarifications, right? So one thing is, like, India has a process for like refugees to come in, and I think here all of these are like kind of illegal immigrants. India has, via like the CAA, it was fast track citizenship to people who have come in before a certain date, 2014, and that is also who was subject to religious persecution in their countries. Myanmar was not a part of it. And second thing is the Rohingya refugees. There is like, Myanmar says that a lot of them are actually Bangladeshis who've come into Myanmar. I don't know whether it is true or not, or what is their domestic situation. But here, I think due process has to be followed. And in a country which is a still, I would say, we are not poor, but we are lower middle income country. I think the first resources should be given to like Indian citizens, right? So I think that is there. Uh, Basically, I think it's like a very big failure of communication. And then there has been some firefighting and something of that sort. As for like, in terms of uh, what do you say? People are viewing it with their own ideological lens, whichever side suits them, and everybody kind of likes to give their biased opinions and like look at it from that angle. But I think whatever it is some sort of a mistake, which should kind of like the ruling authority should learn from it. And also, this tells you another thing, that in the age of like social media, the feedback is much faster. So whether positive, negative, or whichever interest group wants to give, I think there is a much faster feedback loop. So I don't know if it was a error which they kind of like took a step back, or whether it is uh, like miscommunication within different arms of the government and this was not agreed upon. But whichever way, I think there's fast feedback, and it is the sign of the times that we are living in, right? So it is what it is.
Yeah. No, this was a classic case of Hanlon's razor as well, right? I mean, people were very quick to kind of jump to the fact that, hey, this government doesn't understand the situation and so on and so forth. But yeah, like the razor says, I mean, don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to naivety, right? So, yeah. All right. Moving on, another contentious topic. FIFA has suspended India's top football administrative organization, the AIFF. The reason given for this move was to quote undue influence from third parties. The Bureau of the FIFA Council, which passed the judgment, also took away India's rights to hold the FIFA Under 17 Women's World Cup 2022. The current set of troubles for the Indian Football Federation began after the erstwhile AIFF president Praful Patel, who was also FIFA Council member, refused to relinquish this post as the head of the football federation in the country. The Supreme Court intervened and removed Patel from his post, replacing him with a committee of administrators. Allowing this was a textbook case of third party interference, according to FIFA statuses. Uh, Abhishek, can you simplify this for our listeners and also explain, what this really means for Indian football?
So, when it comes to Indian football, like many other sporting bodies, this has remained under the control of very few politicians over the years. In the 90s and early 2000s, I believe it was the Congress leader Priyaranjan Dashmunshi who used to, totally dominate AIFF. And after that, I think it went to Praful Patel, right? So Praful Patel, the NCP leader, and I think a former cabinet minister as well, right? Or at least he was the minister for airlines, I think. So civil aviation. So he basically has been heading AIFF for a long time. So elections were due for AIFF, but there were, allegations of misconduct or whatever, like internal corruption and things like that, and therefore the elections were not being held for a certain period of time. And so, as it happens in many things, it basically the case ended up in the Supreme Court. Now, cricket fans will remember that a few years ago, the Supreme Court had sort of formed a kind of committee to even regulate Indian cricket, right? Because the BCCI was not, doing reforms. And so in this case as well, the Supreme Court formed a three-member committee, the COA as it is called here, to basically, bring back order into the AIFF. Now, to FIFA, it appears like uh, the National Football Association of a country is facing interference from outside authorities, right? The FIFA will not, the FIFA is not okay with someone like the Supreme Court stepping in, right? And according to FIFA, it is the for the AIFF themselves to sort their issues out internally without any external influence. So FIFA has sent, laid down certain steps to be followed so that the AIFF can get back on track, conduct elections accordingly, and so on. But it's not okay with Supreme Court stepping in. And so, with that being the reason, they essentially ended up suspending or banning India officially last week. Now, as you said, India was also supposed to hold the Women's Junior World Cup later this year. And so, obviously, with AIFF no longer being a valid organization under FIFA, that hosting opportunity sadly goes away from India. So yeah, I'm hopeful that things will get sorted out quickly. I think the government is in touch with FIFA via the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, and yeah, hopefully these things get sorted out. Unfortunately, while Indian sports has been doing really well, in recent years, we do know that it's still going to be under some sort of political influence, right? Because that's one of the areas where our political leaders like to venture out, right? That is by heading various sports bodies, whether it is at the central level or the state level. But yeah, I think things sort of went totally out of whack here, and we are at this point. No, I don't think we can. I mean, what is a politician, right? I mean, hypothetically, tomorrow you and I also can fight an election. So I don't think that is something which is. I don't think that seems like a logical way out. You could say that, okay, fine, ministers at central and state level should not get involved, or something like that is probably more possible. I think what is needed is probably better coverage of sports, and so that the public also takes a more keener interest, and then with that kind of public support, possibly more former sports persons can come up and fight these elections and so on.
Yeah, so I think two things. One is sports administration is a very different skill set from playing sports. Not a lot of good sports players, either, even not even coaching is like a different skill set. So I think, yes, sports administration, while a lot of politicians get in, see, it's where in India, apart from like cricket, not a lot of sports generate enough money by themselves to be like self organizing or being able to fund themselves. So it's all given by the largest of the government. And now it is where you are allocating money. Politicians find a way to kind of get all these things, help out their cronies, etc. They get all these plum postings, and this is the way kind of they exert their power. So what is probably needed is like something where people who are involved in like the sport administration at like either local level of clubs or like other organizational abilities who have organizational skill set. So I'll give an example like Jagmohan Dalmia was never a cricketer but a master administrator, right? and probably all Indian sports federations need that. Indians are now taking key interest in Indian sports. There's a lot more television viewership, so there could be a lot more sponsorship. So I think if that done better is a lot better than like politicians trying to exert their power and try to hold on to things where neither do they have any expertise nor even do they have any interest. If there are people within the administration of sports clubs, etc., they rise up. They at least have interest in the sport or running the sport. So I think this is probably like some sort of a reform, and that has to come from below, from the fans, from the people.
No, for sure. I mean, I think somewhere we had to put an end to the gravy train as such, right? Where the cronies of politicians can mooch off of the coffers of these federations, right? Yeah, and less corruption, more professionalism, for sure. Couldn't agree more. Moving on, a suspicious boat was found in Maharashtra's Raigad containing assault rifles and other weapons. Maharashtra Deputy Chief Minister, Mr. Devendra Fadnavis, who is also in charge of the State Home Ministry, informed the Assembly that the police were called and the yacht was searched after it was found by fishermen near Harihareshwar port. The Deputy Chief Minister also said the vessel is called Lady Han and is owned by an Australian woman, Hannah Londagan. uh, while the weapons have since been recovered by the police, there are still questions regarding their origin. Nirav, I mean, we haven't seen something like this on the internal security front in a long time, right? I remember, at one point of time, perhaps 10 years or 15 years back, I mean, this used to be a regular thing, right? Bombs in trains and whatnot. Is this reason for alarm or?
So there's a lot more than meets the eye, right? So one is it's like a ocean-worthy 15-meter long sailing yacht, right? With like its mast down, etc., and then which has drifted towards Raigad, right? So this is a classic spy novel stuff or like movie stuff. So what the claim is being made is that an Australian couple was sailing from Europe and they were on the way back to Australia, and near the Gulf of Oman where they were caught in a storm. The boat was capsizing, and then they called out an SOS, and a Korean ship picked them up, a merchant ship of with a Korean flag. They picked them up and they got saved. And now this boat drifted to uh, all the way to Raigad. So one, that could be possible, but two, if the boat was capsizing, then how could the boat float all the way to Raigad, right? So a, that seems fishy. I'm not so sure. Maybe the internal navigation system or like the mast broke off. I'm not too sure. Two, supposedly there were just two people on board, and they have three AK-47 guns, right? So like it's like something doesn't add up, right? Or like that Gabbar Singh dialogue, right? Do or banduk teen, doesn't add up. Three, the guns are AK-47. So if they're like actually in Australia being like a US ally, the guns that Australians use, first, it's very difficult to procure guns in Europe or Australia. Two, that the guns which that bloc uses is typically M16s and AR-15s, which are the automatic machine guns used of choice. AK-47 is a Russian design. A lot of like a terrorist, and because it's there in the black market after the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of people have copied that design and then manufactured it in many places. India being like a closer to Russian ally, Indian army uses AK-47s, but this is not a weapon of choice for like, somebody who's an Australian citizen. It is not easily procurable. So definitely there's a lot more than what meets the eye. Probably, I don't know, it could be like a terrorist shipment or something, some arms deal at sea which went wrong. Who knows? Uh, I think only time will tell. Obviously, the authorities are smart enough. If like a person like me, like a complete novice, can think about these things, our police, coast guard, etc., they might have gone through all of that and scenarios. But definitely, it's something more than which meets the eye. Probably needs a lot more investigation, and some root cause or something needs to be seen. And second thing is, uh, like the Australian couple who owns the boat, if they kind of make a claim or an insurance claim or something, then probably they need to be answerable to questions, right? So uh, I don't know. Thankfully, this has been caught, and there's no other untoward damage. There's no other group which probably was getting three AK-47 guns with a lot of ammunition. So yeah, hopefully this is one off incident, and we don't see some sort of like a repeat thing or some attempt to smuggle arms inside the country, etc.
And finally, BJP has revamped its premier parliamentary board after 8 years, while Union Minister Mr. Nitin Gadkari and Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister Mr. Shivraj Singh Chauhan were dropped. Union Minister Sarbananda Sonowal and former Karnataka Chief Minister B.S. Yediyurappa are among the six new members. The move also comes months before the Gujarat Assembly elections, which will kick off a series of electoral contests, culminating with the national elections in the first half of 2024. Abhishek, how do you read this?
Yeah, I mean, as it happens with these cases, there is going to be a lot of media reporting and speculation, not just on those who were included in the parliamentary board, but those who were left out or not included, right? And so there's a lot of reportage happening right now on why Mr. Nitin Gadkari has not been, kept in this parliamentary board. Why has Mr. Shivraj Singh Chauhan, not been kept in this, or why, for example, Yogi Adityanath is not part of this parliamentary board. So yeah, I think a lot of interesting media speculation is happening. When it comes to this current board, from what I can see, they made an effort to include people from different parts of the country. So they've tried to have, let's say, Sarbananda Sonowal representing Assam. You have Iqbal Singh Lalpura representing Punjab, right? So there's someone from Madhya Pradesh, there's someone from Andhra Pradesh. So I think they've tried to spread it out geographically. They've tried to spread it out in terms of whether it is caste, uh, whether it is you look at SC, ST, OBC, those kind of parameters. So I mean they've tried to make it sort of what people generally say, right, diverse in terms of region or background, right? This, I think, Karnataka is probably the only state apart from Gujarat which has two representatives, right? So there is P.S. Yediyurappa and P.L. Santosh. And one interesting thing I noted is they have also included people from like different generations, like someone like Satyanarayan Jatia is someone who was, you know, uh, there in the Atal Bihari Vajpayee cabinet, right? And then recently he was a member of parliament and so on. But interesting to give once again emphasis for people who have largely been out of the public light as well. So yeah, I found it quite interesting, and I think it will be quite significant, as you said, with the elections coming up. This is the definitely the most powerful governing body within the BJP, and so it's always interesting to note who are the people in charge of this.
All right, that's a wrap from us here at the weekly. We have a couple of very interesting episodes coming up. We have one with Professor Gautam Desiraju. He is uh, among the most cited scientists that India has produced. Right. In fact, I think perhaps the second or third most cited scientist. Yeah, and he has this new book coming out, Bharat 2.0, which is very interesting. We're going to be talking to Professor Desi Raju about that. Also, we have a familiar face back on the podcast. We have Ashish Chandorkar, right, who's a consular permanent mission of India to the WTO and an old friend of Bharatvaarta. A lot of you have asked for his return, and so he is kind enough to come on one of these episodes. We'll be talking about trade and exports and how India is positioned in these respects and why it is important for us. So yeah, a couple of very good episodes coming up. Do check it out. And again, please rate, review us on all of your platforms. It really helps more people discover Bharat Varta's content. So thank you again for joining us on this lovely Sunday. Hope you have a fantastic week ahead, and Jai Hind.